Undertale is a 2016 Whatever, you know what Undertale is, we're in a game scoring class. Frankly, I'd be concerned if you didn't. Anyways, Undertale is a game which has been revered not only for its inventive battle system and ludonarrative consonants, but its seminal soundtrack. Composed single-handedly by the game's developer, Toby Fox, entirely within FL Studio, the work stands as an emblematic example of what can be achieved when aesthetic inspirations are evolved to fit the needs of a given project. The game's music, much like the visuals, takes heavy inspiration from the NES, SNES era of games, sort of blending the two with modern sound fonts and compositional convention to create something entirely new. The game's retro sources, however, are best exemplified in the game's main theme. Undertale, as a story game, has a number of different endings, with the ending the player receives a direct result of their actions in game. Most famously, there's a pacifist, and for our use cases, a neutral route, achieved by successfully finishing every individual character's story arcs, as well as not killing a single enemy encountered either in boss battles or random encounters, and the genocide route, achieved by engaging in the colloquially named act of grinding, or more specifically in Undertale's case, killing every boss monster and enemy encountered in random battles until no more appear. Along with the actual narrative content of the game changing as a consequence of your actions, the game's music dynamically responds to the state of the route that the player is currently on. I can explain the actual triggers for these changes in more detail later, but I think it's more helpful to take a look at an example of this dynamic response. First, the track Snowy plays normally in the pacifist/neutral route as follows. Here's what that same song sounds like in the genocide route. It is important to note that, at least for the game's OST, these two songs are considered to be the same track. As should be plainly obvious, the track is slowed to a crawling, eerie pace, which matches the drab, hopeless atmosphere the game's genocide route hopes to instill. The game genocide route was specifically designed to be impossible to trigger accidentally, and as such, the required triggers for the route to begin are tedious at best. The game has four main areas: Ruins, Snowden, Waterfall, and Hotland. Each area has a certain monster quota that needs to be filled before the player fights the area's boss and moves on to the next. If the player fails to at any point meet this quota before progressing, the run is cancelled and the player returns to a neutral route. The first area, the ruins, requires the player to kill 20 monsters before the random encounters turn into a blank screen with the text, "But nobody came." After this point is reached, the music changes much more drastically than in the Snowden example, as this is the point where the genocide route actually begins. Okay, honestly, this has all been a bit of a downer so far, so let's take a look at another less murdery example of the game's interactive music systems. There's a basic but fun music-oriented puzzle about halfway through the pacifist run in the waterfall section of the game, where the player has to use the clues in their environment to learn a melody. This melody can then be played later on a keyboard in the game to unlock a secret room. Ultimately, Undertale is a game that understands itself and its medium, and uses that understanding to its advantage to tell an emotionally impactful story through its art, gameplay, and importantly music. Don't even get me started on the leitmotifs. Within the game's normal runtime, as well as when counted in the official OST, there are a total of 100 tracks in Undertale. Well, technically there are 101 if you include the track titled Goodnight. That one doesn't always show up in a lot of versions of the soundtrack for some reason, so whether it counts officially depends on which version of the soundtrack you're looking at. But for the sake of discussion, it's worth acknowledging its existence even if it's a bit of an odd outlier. This 101 track count only includes what you could describe as the main songs, the ones most people consider part of the game's core soundtrack. It does not, however, account for several smaller musical elements or stingers present throughout the game. These stingers are short, contextual musical audio clips that sit on the border between song and sound effect, as in the music box puzzle from earlier. They may not feel like fully fledged songs, but they do contribute to the game's overall soundscape. For instance, if we're including a track like Duck That Carries You Over a Disproportionately Small Gap, that's my fourth time recording that, as a legitimate part of the soundtrack, then I think it's fair to argue that, at least in Undertale's case, the line between music and sound design can get a little blurry. Beyond the official tracks, there's another interesting layer to the Undertale soundtrack, the unused songs. Buried in the game files are 11 additional tracks that never made it into the final game. These are an interesting mix of content. Some of them are Easter eggs or joke songs meant for laughs or experimentation than anything else. Others are early versions of songs that actually did end up making it into the final game, just in a more polished form. And then there are the tracks that seem to exist purely as a way for Toby Fox to poke fun at his audience or even himself, like ABC 123.
Hello, have some respect and don't spoil the game.
It's impossible to have mysteries nowadays.
Because of nosy people like you.
Please keep all of this between us.
If you post it online, I won't make any more secrets.
No one will be impressed.
It will be your fault.
While these unused tracks might not have made the final cut, they offer a glimpse into the creative process behind the music and Toby's strange mind. The success of the Undertale OST goes beyond just its use in the game. It's worth noting that the soundtrack achieved significant milestones in the charts, a considerable feat for what some might dismiss as, quote, just video game music. The album reached as high as number 5 on the Billboard soundtrack charts and even at number 21 on the independent album charts. These rankings are a testament to how much the music resonated to people, even outside of the context of the game itself. It's kind of rare for a video game soundtrack to achieve this kind of cultural impact, and it speaks volumes about the quality and emotional depth of the music. Just a fun personal anecdote that I think speaks to the popularity of the Undertale soundtrack just as a piece of music. I was playing a song from it, Fallen Down, for my cousin at a family get together, and they were like, oh, it's that song from TikTok, and nothing has ever made me angrier.